What's happening? This is Joshua Boyce and you're watching Sporting Icons.
Now, I think it would be fair to say that us as boxing fans, as a collective, we are very impatient when it comes to boxers that we see on TV. Meaning that even after someone's had 2 or 3 fights, we're already passing judgment on them. We're predicting what their future is going to be, and of course we're criticising the opponents. Now for me, I'm sure many of you may have already noticed by now that I don't really go in or criticise fighters until they get to round about the 15 fight mark. That's when I really start to ask questions of them. Like, when are you going to be fighting for a British title, a Commonwealth, a European? How far away are we looking for a world title? At this kind of stage, around about the 15 fight mark, is where I really start to pass judgment. Before then, there's nothing wrong with padding out your resume. And I've always been very open to it, where I think that a fighter should pad out his or her resume. And that means taking on journeymen, that means taking on gatekeepers, that means taking on Latvian bin men. Okay, I have no problem with any of that. So I don't really pass judgment. The only time that I'll probably critique someone is if, for example, they're on like 10 fights and they're fighting somebody with 1 win and 25 losses. I am going to be looking at it and going, well, maybe you should be fighting someone with a bit more wins under your resume. But again, there's exceptions to every rule. If somebody, for example, has had a outstanding amateur career, then of course I would expect more a lot quicker. I can give you one example. We can look at, say, Anthony Joshua. He had 43 fights as an amateur, and of course he's got the Olympic background. Dillian Whyte, 7 fights as an amateur, no championship background whatsoever. So I expected more from Joshua earlier than what I did with Dillian Whyte, if that makes sense. Now, of course, we can look at, say, recent fighters such as Campbell Hatton. I think Campbell Hatton, he comes under a lot of criticism. Don't get me wrong, I criticised in the last fight, not him and his performance, but the fact that I thought that his opponent won that fight. And I think most people collectively agree that Campbell Hatton did not win that last fight. So of course I will still be judgmental on whether or not you win or lose a fight. For me, I don't care if you're a pro debut, I don't care if you've had 3 fights, 5 fights, 10 fights. If you lose a fight, then you lost the fight. Unless of course I know them personally, then my bias will kick in, okay? I'll make every excuse in the book if possible. But the reality is, I have no issues with, say, Campbell Hatton fighting the level of opponents that he is. I had no problem when it came to Conor Benn. I had no problem with anybody fighting whoever it is that they're going to be fighting. Again, if a fighter has been out of the ring for quite some time, such as, say, Tyson Fury, he was out of the ring for 2.5, 3 years. I had no issues with him fighting Sefer Seferi and Francesco Pianetta. Even after the first Wilder fight, I didn't have an issue. I know a lot of you did, and some of you were criticising the fact that I wasn't going in on Tyson Fury for his choice of opponents when it came to Tom Schwartz and Otto Wallin. For me, they were both undefeated and they're both ranked in the top 15 of a sanctioning body, at that time the WBO. So for me, I had no issue with it. It's a case of, well, you're undefeated, you're ranked in the top 15, so prove your ranking or lose it. That's how I am. Now, the reason that I'm saying this is because a lot of us do go in and start passing judgment on a lot of fighters. And I think unfairly. I do feel unfairly. I can agree with some situations where, for example, I don't think Campbell Hatton should have been as high up on the card, on the Joshua Usyk undercard. I don't think that he should be having a higher place above someone else just because of the name Hatton. I don't think that at all. I don't feel that. I think that's probably wrong. And I had the same thing with Conor Benn. I thought, even when he had his first headliner some time ago, that was too early to be a headliner. It was far too early. Now, I understand the best way to build up somebody is to get out the early nerves. Get used to fighting in front of huge crowds. So, for example, when we see some prospects, we can look at them and go, should you really be on TV? Should you be fighting on the small hall shows, building up your resume that way? Go knock over whoever it is you're going to be knock over. The Lithuanian garbage disposal people. However it may be, okay, the Eastern European chip shop sellers. I don't know, okay? But the fact is, I don't have a problem with these kind of things. Like, I didn't really have a problem with Anthony Yarde, pretty much all the way up to when he fought Kovalev. I was critical because I felt that he was bypassing the whole domestic scene, as in he was bypassing even the area. He didn't get an area belt. He hasn't got a British, a Commonwealth, or even a European. If you can get at least one of those, I can be happy, but he didn't. Right before we get a world title fight, you can see what happens. And it happens many, many times. Same with Conor Benn. He hasn't won an area, a British, Commonwealth, or a European, but yet they're looking at him knocking on the door for a world title. These are the kind of situations that make me think that somebody's going to get really, really hurt at some point. For me, I think a fighter should go through the levels. Of course, some fighters will mature quicker than others. Some fighters, it isn't about their ability. They can do it in the gym, but they can't do it on fight night. It's about maybe they get nervous in front of a crowd. Anyway, the point is, I think people are being far too critical on many, many fighters. As I said before, for me, if a fighter's had 15 fights, ordinarily, I'm going to really start expecting. And I will start asking questions. But again, as I said before, exceptions to the rule. For example, say a Alexander Usyk or a Vasyl Lomachenko, they came into the pro game off of a huge amateur background. So, of course, I expected a whole lot quicker. And, of course, they delivered a whole lot quicker. Joe Joyce as well. Joe Joyce, for me, I think has done absolutely fantastic. He really has. I'm not critical when it comes to, say, Hughie Fury, with the fact that he lost to Kubrat Pulev, Joseph Parker, and Alexander Povetkin. I'm not critical of that. Because at these kind of stages, he shouldn't have really been fighting those guys. But he has. He risked it. He come up short, of course. But he can learn from that. So I don't have a problem with it. Much like I didn't really have a problem with, say, Dave Allen fighting a Dillian Whyte, a Luis Ortiz, and a Tony Yoka, providing you learn from it. Unfortunately, with Dave Allen, he didn't really learn from it. And a lot of it was down to his own doing, the fact that he wasn't training. So, of course, there's always exceptions to the rule. But for me, I think people do need to calm down a little bit when it comes to critiquing, overly critiquing, and maybe even predicting where a fight is going to be. A fighter on 5 fights shouldn't be the same fighter in 15 fights, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the whole situation. Of course, you drop me yours, click a thumbs up, and make sure you are subscribed. And I'll catch you on the next video.